Eleanor Marsh pressed her back flat against the library wall and stopped breathing. Through the gap in the velvet curtain, she watched Edward Caldwell lift his pen, her pen, the one she'd given him last Christmas, and drag it slowly across a contract that carried her name crossed out in red ink. 3 years. 3 years of her mind, her work, her love, gone in the time it took ink to dry on paper. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She pressed one hand flat against her chest and felt her heart break so quietly that no one in that room would ever know. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and join our Forbidden Secret Love Chronicles family. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's find out what Eleanor does next. The Hargrove Summer Ball was Philadelphia's grandest tradition, and Eleanor had been looking forward to it for months. She had not been looking forward to this. She stood perfectly still behind the library curtain, one hand braced against the wall, and listened to the man she loved dismantle 3 years of her life in less than 5 minutes. The terms are satisfactory. Edward's voice carried the same easy confidence it always did, the tone of a man who had never once doubted his right to take up space in a room. My family's debts will be cleared in full? Every penny. Harrison Hargrove's voice was slower, heavier, the voice of a man who understood that money was the only language worth speaking. $50,000, cleared by the end of the month. In exchange, you marry my Victoria before the season ends. Paper rustled. A pen scratched. Eleanor's fingernails pressed into the wallpaper. Wait, she thought. Wait for it. He'll say something. He'll tell them no. He'll remember. What about Eleanor? Edward asked. She exhaled. There it was. He remembered. Miss Marsh? Harrison's tone shifted the way a man's voice shifts when he's discussing livestock prices. Give her something. A settlement. Enough to find herself a school teacher or a shopkeeper somewhere quiet. She's resilient enough. Silence stretched for 3 full seconds. Then Edward signed. The pen scratch was soft, barely a sound, but Eleanor heard it like a gunshot in an empty church. She'll make a fuss, Victoria said from across the room. Her voice was pleasant, the way a drawn blade is pleasant, clean, cold, and designed for damage. Women like her always do. They confuse usefulness for belonging. She'll be managed, Gerald Caldwell said. Edward's father. The man who had shaken Eleanor's hand at church every Sunday for 3 years and called her a fine, capable young woman. She's a sensible girl. She understands her position. Her position. Eleanor had drafted 6 of Gerald Caldwell's most profitable trade agreements. She had rewritten the Caldwell-Morrison shipping contract 3 times because Edward kept misreading the clauses. She had negotiated directly with 2 state representatives on Gerald's behalf, while Gerald sat in the parlor drinking bourbon and taking credit. Her position. She turned from the curtain. Her legs moved before her mind caught up with them, carrying her through the side corridor, away from the library, away from the soft sound of a pen writing her out of existence. She did not run. She would not give this house the dignity of watching her run. She walked fast, head down, through the hallway toward the rear garden door, and collided hard with a solid wall of a chest. Strong hands caught her by both arms before she could stumble. She looked up. The man was tall, broad across the shoulders in a way that suggested he'd earned it rather than inherited it. His hair was dark, shot through with silver at the temples, pulled back from a face that was all sharp angles and steady gray eyes. He wore a dark coat, simple cut, no unnecessary flourish. But something in the way he wore it suggested he had never once needed flourish to command a room. He looked at her with those gray eyes and didn't speak immediately. Just looked. The way a man looks when he is taking an accurate accounting of a situation before opening his mouth. "You all right, miss?" His voice was low, measured. The voice of a man who had learned that speaking quietly made people lean in and listen harder. "I'm fine." Eleanor stepped back from his hands, straightened her spine. "Forgive me, I wasn't watching where I was going." "Reckon neither of us was." He studied her face for a moment longer, then was strictly polite. "Though I'd say you were watching something else entirely." She stiffened. "I don't know what you mean." "Library curtain's got a gap about 2 inches wide on the left side," he said. "I noticed it myself about an hour ago when I was passing through." His expression didn't change. "Useful, a gap like that. Lets a person hear things that were meant to stay private." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "Who are you?" "Colonel Nathaniel Harwick." He inclined his head, barely a fraction. "Formerly of the United States Army. Currently of no particular importance, according to most of the people in that ballroom." She recognized the name a half-second after he said it. Everyone in Philadelphia recognized that name. 3 years ago, Nathaniel Harwick had been the most decorated military investigator in Pennsylvania. He had also, in front of Governor Whitmore and half the city's leadership, publicly refused to authorize the arrest and trial of 7 men on charges he called fabricated. He had said, in plain language, with no apology, that the governor was being manipulated by wealthy families who wanted those 7 men's land and would manufacture whatever evidence was necessary to get it. The governor had stripped him of his commission the following week. The 7 men were still free. Their land was still theirs. Harwick had not apologized. "You were disgraced," Eleanor said, "publicly." Something flickered in his gray eyes. Not quite a smile. "Privately, that's a more complicated question." "What's your name, miss?" "Eleanor Marsh." "Marsh." He was quiet for a moment. "You work for the Caldwells." "I worked for the Caldwells." The past tense came out before she decided to use it. But it was accurate now, wasn't it? "I managed their correspondence, drafted their contracts, handled their negotiations." "Handled," he repeated. "Not assisted, not supported. Handled." "Yes, and Edward Caldwell is currently in that library, signing your future over to Harrison Hargrove's daughter." His voice stayed level, no pity in it, which she was grateful for. Pity would have undone her. How much did they offer to clear his family's debts? Eleanor looked at him steadily. $50,000. Same amount they offered me to walk away from those 7 men. His jaw shifted. Hargrove's a man who believes everything in this world has a price tag. He's not entirely wrong. He's just wrong about which things have them. She studied him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Nathaniel said, "I have a proposition for you. And I find it's better to establish mutual understanding before making propositions." He reached into his coat and produced a folded document. "Walk with me." She should have said no. She should have found her wrap, called for a carriage, gone home, and spent the night deciding what came next. She should have done the sensible, careful, measured thing. Eleanor Marsh took one look at the folded document in his hand and said, "Where?" They walked to the far edge of the rear garden, where the lantern light didn't quite reach. The summer heat pressed down heavy and thick, the way Philadelphia summers always did, like the whole city was holding its breath. Nathaniel handed her the document. She unfolded it, read it once, read it again. It was a marriage contract, precise, clean, legally sound. 1 year of marriage. At the end of that year, she would receive $30,000, enough to live independently, to travel, to work on her own terms for the rest of her life. She would retain the title of Mrs. Eleanor Harwick permanently, even after the marriage dissolved. She would have full access to Harwick's household and resources during their arrangement. And at the bottom, in Nathaniel's firm, angular handwriting, Both parties enter this arrangement freely, as equals, without obligation beyond those stated above. This is, she paused, this is generous. It's fair, he said. There's a difference. Why? She folded the document along its original creases, buying herself time to think. You don't know me. I know your work. He looked at her directly. The Caldwell-Morrison shipping contract, the terms you negotiated on the Eastern tariff agreements last spring, the letter you drafted to the State Trade Committee, the one Gerald Caldwell signed his name to and read aloud in public like he'd written it himself. He paused. I've been watching how that family operates for 2 years, Miss Marsh. I know exactly who's been keeping them afloat. The blood moved strangely in her chest. Something halfway between gratitude and anger. You watched and said nothing. I was gathering information, he said. That's different from doing nothing. His gray eyes held hers. I also know that you stood behind that curtain for 4 minutes and didn't make a sound. That's not weakness. That's discipline. I need someone with discipline. And what do you need me for, specifically? The governor has asked me to investigate corruption among Philadelphia's merchant families. His voice dropped half a register. I've spent 3 years building a case. I have evidence, correspondence, financial records. What I don't have is someone who can read contract law well enough to find the hidden fraud in the documents I've collected. He tilted his head fractionally. You can. Eleanor's mind was already moving, already running through the implications. You need a legal analyst. I need a partner, he said. Someone who can move through these social circles without raising suspicion. Someone smart enough to understand what she's looking at. Someone who has personal knowledge of how the Caldwell family conducts its affairs. He paused. And yes, the governor requires that I take a wife before year's end, or he'll reassign my work to a man who will conduct it badly and call it progress. So you need any woman who'll sign? No. His voice was flat and certain. I need a woman who won't break when they come at her. And they will come at her. Every family I'm investigating has daughters and sisters and wives who will test you, diminish you, and try to make you feel like you crawled in through the servant's entrance. His jaw tightened. I need someone who's been surviving that her whole life and learned to smile through it. Eleanor looked at the contract in her hands. $30,000. A name that would open doors no amount of talent had ever managed to open for her. A year of purposeful work, real work, work that mattered beyond making one family's mediocrity look like genius. And Edward Caldwell, watching all of it from a distance, understanding too late what he had signed away. She took the pen from Nathaniel's offered hand and signed her name. He witnessed it without ceremony, folded the document, put it back in his coat. Welcome to an arrangement of mutual benefit, Mrs. Harwick. He offered his arm. Shall we go make this official? We're going back in there? She took his arm, felt the solid steadiness of it under her hand. Now? The Hargroves are about to make their announcement. His expression was unreadable in the lantern-touched dark. I'd like to make ours first. They walked back into the Hargrove ballroom through the main doors, and Eleanor felt the moment the room noticed them. It moved through the crowd like a current, a shift, a turning of heads, a ripple of whispered recognition. The ballroom blazed with summer heat and candlelight. Every important family in Philadelphia was present. Women in pale silk and their best jewelry, men in dark coats discussing money and calling it politics. The master of ceremonies spotted them at the entrance and went slightly pale. Colonel Harwick, he said carefully. We didn't expect. I have a standing invitation from Governor Whitmore, Nathaniel said pleasantly. He's always so thoughtful about reminding me I'm welcome in polite company. He looked at the man without blinking. Announce us. The man swallowed, struck his staff against the floor. Colonel Nathaniel Harwick, and his wife, Mrs. Eleanor Harwick. The music didn't stop immediately, but it faltered, a violin losing its thread, a piano note struck and not resolved, and then it faded into uncertain silence. Every face in the room turned. Eleanor felt their stares like physical weight and kept her spine straight under every last one of them. She had learned a long time ago that the way you carried yourself in the first 5 seconds determined everything that came after. She carried herself like she belonged. They reached the center of the room. The crowd gave way, not graciously, not warmly, but the way crowds give way to something they're not sure how to stop. Edward Caldwell found her from across the ballroom. She saw the exact moment he saw her, saw his face go from confusion to disbelief, to something complicated and sick that she recognized as the first tremor of regret. Victoria Hargrove, standing beside him in gold, silk, and diamonds, narrowed her eyes and placed her hand more firmly on Edward's arm. Gerald Caldwell stepped forward first. Harwick. His voice was careful, diplomatic, the voice of a man buying time to calculate. Didn't know you were acquainted with Miss Marsh. Mrs. Harwick, Nathaniel corrected, mild as a summer afternoon. We were married this morning. Papers filed with the county office. He let that settle for a breath, then added, I understand congratulations are also in order for your son. The Hargrove alliance is quite a significant achievement. He looked at Edward, particularly given the financial pressures your family has faced this season. Edward's face went dark red. That's, Victoria started. Her voice had lost its pleasant blade edge, replaced by something sharper and less controlled. That's not possible. She can't simply what? Eleanor said. Her own voice surprised her. Steady, calm. The voice she used when she was negotiating terms and needed the other party to understand that she was not going to move. Can't simply have married? Can't simply be standing here? She looked at Victoria directly. Which part troubles you, Miss Hargrove? That I found a better arrangement than the one your family purchased? Or that I found it in the same evening? Victoria's mouth pressed into a thin line. I only meant the timing seems... The timing is fine, Nathaniel said. Everything was witnessed and sealed according to Pennsylvania law. He looked around the room with those steady gray eyes. Is there something my wife and I can help clarify for anyone else? Or shall we allow the evening to continue? A silence held for 3 long seconds. Then someone in the back of the room began to clap. Slow, uncertain, then gathering. By the time Eleanor exhaled, the sound had spread to a full third of the ballroom. She looked at Nathaniel. He was watching the room, his expression giving nothing away. But when his gaze came back to her, something in it had shifted. A brief, genuine acknowledgement, there and gone like a candle flame in a draught. Well done, it said without words. She turned back to find Edward had crossed the floor toward them. He moved quickly, with the urgent carelessness of a man who has not yet accepted a situation. Eleanor. He reached for her arm. She stepped back before his hand connected. Eleanor, you have to understand. This was family obligation. My father needed... There was no other way. If you'd only... Don't. Her voice was quiet. Quiet enough that the people nearest them had to lean in to hear it. And lean in they did. Don't tell me it was obligation. I watched you sign that contract, Edward. You didn't hesitate. You didn't argue. You didn't even look sorry. She held his gaze. You looked relieved. His jaw worked. That isn't fair. No, she agreed. It isn't. But it's true. You're doing this out of spite. You're making a scene. I'm having a conversation, Eleanor said. Which is something I did for your family 300 times while your name was the only one in the room anyone bothered to learn. She stepped back. I hope Victoria's money is worth it, Edward. I genuinely do. Because you're going to need it when you realize she can't read a contract well enough to protect you. And neither can you. She turned away before he could answer. Nathaniel was exactly where she'd left him, one step behind her right shoulder, patient as stone. That, he said very quietly, for her ears only, was either the bravest thing I've seen in 3 years or the most satisfying. Can't it be both? Eleanor said. Something crossed his face that she had not expected from the Iron Colonel of Philadelphia, from the most feared investigator in the state, from the man who had dressed down a governor in public and paid for it with his career. He almost smiled. Come, he said. We have a household to get you settled in before morning. They walked out of the Hargrove ballroom together. The crowd parted before them in perfect, stunned silence, the way water parts when it has no other choice. Behind them, Eleanor heard the whispers beginning. She heard Victoria's voice, sharp and fast and furious. She heard Gerald Caldwell's measured tone, already working to manage the damage. She did not look back. The summer night hit them at the front entrance like a wave, warm and thick and smelling of jasmine from the Hargrove garden. A plain black carriage waited in the drive, simple wood and brass fittings, nothing like the gilded coaches lined up along the path. The driver touched his hat. Harwick Hall, Colonel? Yes. Nathaniel handed Eleanor up and followed. The door closed. For a moment they sat in silence as the carriage lurched forward, the lights of the Hargrove estate fading through the small window. You're very calm, Eleanor said finally. I find calm is more useful than the alternative, Nathaniel said. He was watching her with those assessing eyes. How are you, Mrs. Harwick? The name was so new, it still felt like wearing someone else's coat. I married a stranger tonight. You did. I have no idea what happens in the morning. In the morning, he said, you meet the household. Then you sleep. Then we begin the work. He paused. And somewhere in the middle of that, we figure out how to occupy the same house without either of us losing our sanity. Are you always this practical? 30 years in the field teaches you that sentiment is a luxury, he said. But yes, mostly practical. Eleanor leaned against the window and watched Pennsylvania farmland slide past in the summer dark. The anger was still there, coiled somewhere beneath her ribs. But under it, under all of it, was something she hadn't expected to feel tonight. Purpose. Real, specific, dangerous purpose. Harwick, she said quietly. Why did you really choose me? Tonight, of all the ways this could have gone. Why me? He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Because, he said at last, everyone else in that room wanted power for the sake of having it. You wanted your work recognized. He looked at her steadily in the dim carriage light. That's honest. Honest people are rare in my line of work. He paused. And because you stood behind that curtain for 4 minutes with your heart breaking, and you didn't make a sound, that's not something I can teach. A person either has it, or they don't. Eleanor turned back to the window. The summer night rolled on. Philadelphia fell away behind them. Ahead, through the warm dark, lay a house she'd never seen, a life she hadn't chosen a day ago, and work that was finally, truly, her own. She was Eleanor Harwick now, and Edward Caldwell could choke on the memory of what he'd given away. Harwick Hall did not welcome people. Eleanor understood that the moment she stepped through the front door. It wasn't unwelcoming in the way of a cold house or an empty one. It was the silence of a place that had been organized around one man's particular kind of grief for so long that it had forgotten how to make room for anything else. Every surface was clean. Every object had a precise location. Nothing was decorative that didn't also serve a function. It felt less like a home and more like a man's mind made into architecture. Mrs. Agnes Poole met them in the entrance hall. She was perhaps 60, gray-haired, her face a careful map of years spent observing people closely and saying very little of what she actually thought. She looked at Eleanor with the measured attention of someone who had been expecting her and was now conducting a rapid private assessment. "Your room is prepared," she said to Nathaniel. Then she turned to Eleanor. "Mrs. Harwick, welcome." A pause that was barely long enough to notice. "I've aired the east room. It's the best light in the house in the mornings." "Thank you, Mrs. Poole." "Agnes." The housekeeper's expression softened a fraction. "Everyone here calls me Agnes. The Colonel insists on formality. The rest of us learned better." Nathaniel's jaw shifted almost imperceptibly. "Mrs. Poole has strong opinions about household protocol." "Mrs. Poole has strong opinions about most things," Agnes said, already moving toward the stairs. "It's served this house better than the alternative." "This way, if you please, Mrs. Harwick." Eleanor followed her up the staircase, aware of Nathaniel watching them both from the entrance hall below. She had the distinct sense that he was calculating something. She was already calculating too. The east room was plain and clean and larger than she'd expected. A writing desk stood beneath the window, already stocked with fresh paper, ink, 2 sharpened pens. She crossed to it without thinking and ran her fingers across the surface. "He thought you might want to work," Agnes said from the doorway. "He thought about what I'd need?" "The Colonel thinks about everything." Agnes moved into the room and straightened a perfectly straight lamp with the habitual precision of long practice. "He thought about what you'd need before he decided to ask you. That's how he operates. He plans 6 moves ahead and then pretends the outcome surprised him." Eleanor looked at her. "You've known him a long time." "Since he was 19 and too stubborn for his own good." Agnes met her eyes steadily. "He hasn't changed much in that regard. But he's a fair man, Mrs. Harwick. A hard man sometimes, but fair." She moved toward the door. "You'll want rest. The society calls will start within the week. The moment word spreads about tonight, every woman in Philadelphia with an opinion and an afternoon free will find a reason to drop by." "To welcome me?" Agnes gave her a look of such precise, dry patience that Eleanor almost laughed. "To assess you," she said. "To find every crack they can." She paused at the door. "I'd recommend letting them find none." She left, closing the door with barely a sound. Eleanor sat at the writing desk for a long time, not writing, just thinking. The anger from the ballroom had settled into something colder and more useful, the kind of focused clarity that came after the initial shock of a blow. She thought about Edward's face when he'd seen her on Nathaniel's arm. She thought about Victoria Hargrove's voice going sharp and startled, losing its practiced smoothness for just a moment. She thought about $30,000 and a name that opened doors and work that was finally, genuinely her own. She was still thinking when she fell asleep with her cheek against the cool wood of the desk. The knock came at 7 in the morning, sharp and twice. The knock of a man who had decided breakfast was happening and was informing the house of this fact. "There's coffee," Nathaniel said through the door. "Kitchen. When you're ready." She found him in a small kitchen at the back of the house, standing at the stove in his shirt sleeves, doing something with a cast-iron pan that smelled extraordinarily good. She stopped in the doorway. "You cook?" "Field camps don't send up room service," he said without turning around. Sit down. This is almost done. She sat. He plated eggs and cornbread and set the plates on the table with the same precise efficiency he brought to everything else. Then he sat across from her and ate with focused attention, the way a man eats when he is thinking about something else. Eleanor ate half her eggs before she spoke. The society calls, Agnes mentioned. How bad will they be? Depends how quickly word traveled last night, he considered. So, very bad, very fast. Philadelphia gossip moves faster than yellow fever and causes comparable damage. He set down his fork. They'll come with cakes and compliments and questions designed to establish whether you're someone worth cultivating or someone safe to dismiss. The ones who dismiss you will be the dangerous ones. False security is a weapon. I've spent 3 years navigating Edward Caldwell's social world, Eleanor said. I know how this works. You navigated it from the edge, Nathaniel said. Now you're at the center. It's different. She looked at him across the table. He was watching her with those gray eyes that never quite turned off, never quite stopped measuring. You're preparing me like I'm one of your field agents. Aren't you? The word landed flat and honest on the table between them. She thought about it seriously. Is that what this is? A recruitment? This, he said, is a partnership. I told you that last night. I meant it. He leaned forward slightly. Eleanor, what I'm doing, what we're doing, is going to make powerful people very angry. The Hargroves, the Caldwells, half the merchant council. When they get angry, they look for weak points. He held her gaze. I need to know you understand that. I understand it. And I spent 3 years being someone's weak point, she said quietly. I'm finished with that. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite satisfaction. Closer to relief. Good. He stood, collected the plates with practiced efficiency. There's a room on the 2nd floor I need to show you today, after the breakfast things are cleared. She studied his back as he moved to the basin. What kind of room? The kind that explains everything, he said, and answers the questions you haven't asked yet. The 2nd floor room was locked with 2 separate bolts. Eleanor watched Nathaniel produce 2 different keys from 2 different pockets and said nothing. She was already cataloging, already reading. 2 locks meant 2 levels of secrecy. 2 keys carried separately meant even household staff didn't have both. Whatever was behind this door, he had protected it with considerable, deliberate care. The door swung open. She walked in, stopped. 3 walls were covered in documents. Not displayed, working. Maps pinned with colored tacks, threads of different colors connecting points across them. Filing cabinets along the 4th wall, each drawer labeled with a family name. On the central table, a controlled chaos of ledgers, letters, copied contracts, court records. And running through it all, in Nathaniel's precise, angular handwriting, hundreds of marginal notes cross-referencing everything to everything else. Eleanor moved to the nearest map, Philadelphia and its surrounding counties. She traced a thread, red, from a point marked Hargrove Shipping, outward to a dozen smaller markers across 4 counties. Each marker had a name, a family name she recognized. Farm families, smallholders, people who had filed land disputes in the past 3 years and lost. These families, she said carefully, they lost their land? All of them. Nathaniel stood at the center of the room with his arms crossed, watching her move through the space the way a man watches someone handle something he built with extreme care. Between 1811 and now, 15 separate properties, all in disputed proceedings, all resolved in favor of Hargrove-connected buyers. Eleanor pulled a folder from the table and opened it. Inside was a land deed. She could see it immediately, with a forged notary seal. Not a bad forgery. Good enough to pass a quick review. Not good enough to survive close reading by someone who had spent 3 years studying contract law by firelight. "This seal is wrong," she said. "The notary registration number predates the current county system by 4 years. Whoever made this didn't know the system changed in 1809. Nathaniel went absolutely still. "You can see that?" he said. "From a single look?" "It's the kind of detail no one checks unless they know what they're looking for." She turned the document over, examined the signature. "I've seen this handwriting before." She set it down, picked up another. Her pulse was moving faster now, the way it always did when a pattern started to clarify. "This one too. Same hand, same ink composition. You can tell by the spread of the letters. It's a thicker quill than standard legal documents use." She looked up at him. "You've had these for how long?" 14 months, Nathaniel said. His voice had changed. Quieter, more deliberate. "I knew they were fraudulent. I couldn't prove the mechanism." "The mechanism is the handwriting," Eleanor said. "If I can identify the hand, we can trace it to a specific clerk or lawyer. Someone with access to blank deed forms and enough legal knowledge to mimic the format, but not enough to know the registry system changed." She set the document down with controlled precision. "Who prepared the Caldwell contracts I drafted last spring? The ones Edward submitted to the trade committee?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because I've seen this handwriting in those offices," she said. "And if it's the same person—" "Then the Caldwells are connected to the land fraud," he said. "Not just to Hargrove through the marriage contract. Connected directly. As participants." The word fell into the room like a stone into still water. The implication spread outward from it in every direction. Eleanor pressed her palm flat against the table. "Edward didn't just sell me for a financial alliance," she said. The words came out slower than she expected, weighted with something she was still processing. "He sold me to protect himself from a fraud investigation." "That," Nathaniel said carefully, "is what I believe. Yes." She looked at him. "How long have you suspected?" "Long enough." He met her eyes. "I want you to understand something, Eleanor. I didn't bring you into this because of the investigation. I brought you into this because of who you are. The fact that your knowledge overlaps with my case—" "Don't." She held up a hand. Not angry. Clear. "Don't manage how I hear this. I'm not fragile." She picked up the forged deed again and looked at it steadily. "The question isn't why you brought me in. The question is how we use what I know without warning them before we're ready to move." Nathaniel studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out the chair at the center table and sat down. Opened a ledger, slid it across to her. "Start," he said, "with the Hargrove import records from 1812. She sat. She started. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon without stopping. And somewhere in the middle of it, Eleanor stopped feeling like she was sitting in a stranger's house and started feeling like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The first call came 4 days later. Eleanor was in the study. She had already, without quite deciding to, begun thinking of the document room as the study, when Agnes appeared in the doorway with the expression of a woman delivering information she considers moderately insulting. "Mrs. Victoria Hargrove," Agnes said, "has sent a card. She intends to call tomorrow afternoon." Eleanor set down her pen. "Victoria Hargrove is calling on me." "So the card says." Agnes's tone conveyed her precise assessment of this, without requiring her to state it explicitly. "She wants to see the house," Eleanor said. "She wants to see whether I belong in it." She wants to see whether you're afraid of her, Agnes said. Those are different things. And if I'm not afraid of her? Agnes looked at her with something that might, on a different face, have been the beginning of warmth. Then she'll leave here less certain than she arrived, she said, which is the only acceptable outcome. Eleanor picked up her pen again. Tell her I'll receive her at 3. Agnes was halfway out the door when Eleanor added, without looking up from her work, And Agnes, make the good tea, the kind that takes some effort to prepare. Let her wait for it. A pause. Then Agnes said, in a tone Eleanor hadn't heard from her yet, dry and genuinely amused, Yes, Mrs. Harwick. Victoria Hargrove arrived precisely on time, which was itself a message. Punctuality in social calls meant you were making a point, not paying a friendly visit. She was beautiful in the way that very expensive, very carefully managed things are beautiful. Her gown was pale yellow silk, summer weight, pressed to rigid perfection. Her hair was arranged with artful precision. She wore the small, controlled smile of a woman who had been trained since childhood to use pleasantness as a forward position. Mrs. Harwick. Her eyes moved over Eleanor once, a rapid, cataloging sweep, before settling on her face. What a delightful surprise, your marriage. The whole city is speaking of it. How kind of them, Eleanor said. Please, sit down. They sat across from each other in the front parlor, while Agnes's deliberate tea preparation made itself known by its extended absence. Victoria's smile held steady. Eleanor's expression held steadier. I wanted to call personally, Victoria said, to offer my congratulations, and to say, that I hope there are no hard feelings between us. Hard feelings, Eleanor repeated, keeping her voice pleasantly neutral. About what, specifically? Victoria's smile didn't waver, but something behind her eyes recalibrated. The situation with Edward was complicated. Family obligations. Victoria. Eleanor leaned forward slightly and lowered her voice to the register she used when she wanted someone to hear every single word clearly. I have no feelings about Edward Caldwell whatsoever. He made a business decision. I made a better one. She held the woman's gaze. Was there something else you wanted to discuss? A pause, short but significant. You're very direct, Victoria said. I've found it saves everyone a great deal of time. Victoria set her gloves on her knee with the deliberateness of someone buying a moment to think. People are saying interesting things about the Colonel, she said, shifting angles smoothly. About his work since leaving the army. People say interesting things about everyone, Eleanor said. They say he's dangerous. Most capable men are. They say he keeps files. Victoria's voice dropped half a register, pressing harder now. On families. On their private affairs. Eleanor looked at her with absolute calm. Victoria, she said, are you here to congratulate me on my marriage, or are you here because your father sent you? The silence lasted 4 full seconds. It was the longest 4 seconds Eleanor had sat through in recent memory, and she sat through all of them without flinching. Victoria stood. Her smile was still in place, but it had gone rigid at the edges, the way a mask goes when the face underneath it stops cooperating. I think I won't stay for tea after all, she said. I have another call to make. Of course, Eleanor rose, walked her to the door. Give my regards to your father, and to Edward. Victoria paused at the threshold, turned back, and for one unguarded moment, the polished surface dropped, and Eleanor saw what was underneath it. Not cruelty, exactly. Something more complicated. Something that might have been envy or fear, or both braided together. You know, Victoria said quietly, you're not what I expected. No, Eleanor said pleasantly. I don't imagine I am. She closed the door. She stood in the entrance hall for 30 seconds, perfectly still. And then her knees, very slightly, wanted to buckle, and she leaned one hand against the wall and breathed through it. Her heart was hammering, the way it only hammered when a negotiation had gone to the wire and come back from it. "Well," Nathaniel's voice came from the top of the stairs. He was looking down at her with those gray eyes that missed nothing. He had been listening. Of course, he had been listening. "Harrison Hargrove sent his daughter to get a read on us." "She was fishing," Eleanor said. "She mentioned the files." "I heard." He came down the stairs slowly. "She'll report back that you didn't react." "Which means either we have nothing to hide," Eleanor said, "or we're better at hiding it than he expected." She straightened up from the wall. "Either way, we bought time." Nathaniel stopped 2 steps above her, which put them at eye level. He looked at her for a long moment, with an expression she was beginning to recognize. The one where he was recalculating something, and the result was coming out different than the original estimate. "You did well," he said. Simply, no elaboration. Eleanor thought about the 3 years she'd spent producing work that Edward received credit for. The 3 years of course, and naturally, and what would we do without her? And how none of it had ever sounded like what Nathaniel had just said. You did well. 2 words, direct, honest, no qualification. "There's more in the Hargrove import records," she said, because that was the safest thing to say, and she needed to say something that wasn't about the unexpected weight of being seen clearly. "The discrepancy I found this morning, the shipping manifest dated July 1813, the same forged notation style. I think it connects to the land deed series." Nathaniel's jaw shifted. "How far back does it go?" "Further than we thought," she said. "This started before the Caldwells were involved. Harrison Hargrove has been building this for a decade." He looked at her steadily. "How certain are you?" "Certain enough," Eleanor said, "that we need to be very careful about how we move next." He nodded once, decisive. "Then we move carefully." He stepped past her toward the back of the house, then stopped and looked back. "And Eleanor?" "Yes." "Next time she sends someone," he said, "let them wait longer for the tea." Eleanor laughed. It came out sharp and real and surprised her. It seemed to surprise him, too. A flicker of something unguarded crossed his face before the controlled expression settled back. "Go on," he said. "The Hargrove records." She went. Behind her, she heard him exhale, slow and quiet. And she had the distinct, complicated feeling that Nathaniel Harwick had not laughed at anything in a very long time, and was not entirely sure what to do with the fact that he'd just come close. The document that broke everything open was not dramatic. It never is, Eleanor had learned. The most dangerous truths don't announce themselves. They sit quietly in the middle of ordinary paperwork, waiting for someone who knows what they're looking at. She found it on a Tuesday morning, 9 days after Victoria Hargrove's visit. Buried inside a stack of copied shipping manifests Nathaniel had obtained from a contact at the Port Authority. The manifest was dated March 1812. Standard import record, standard format, standard everything, until line 47, where a cargo listing for dry goods from the Eastern merchants had been logged under a ledger code that Eleanor recognized because she had created it. She had created it in November 1811 for the Caldwell family's internal accounting system. A code she had designed herself, shown to Edward and Gerald, and no one else. Here it was, on a Hargrove shipping document, 14 months before Edward Caldwell signed his engagement contract with Victoria. Her hand was completely steady when she set the manifest down. That surprised her. She had expected her hand to shake. Instead, she felt the same cold, clarifying stillness she'd felt behind the library curtain. That particular kind of calm that only comes when something you already half knew finally proves itself true. She stood up, walked directly to Nathaniel's study, knocked twice, and opened the door before he answered. He looked up from his desk with the expression of a man whose concentration she had just interrupted, and who was deciding whether to be annoyed about it. She put the manifest in front of him, pointed to line 47, said nothing. He read it again. His jaw went tight. "The ledger code," he said. "I invented it," Eleanor said. "November 1811. I showed it to Edward and Gerald Caldwell and no one else." She kept her voice level. The Caldwells and Hargroves weren't just connected through the marriage negotiation. They'd been running coordinated accounts since at least early 1812, possibly before. She paused. The land fraud isn't a Hargrove scheme with Caldwell participation. It's a joint operation. Gerald Caldwell is a partner, not a client. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair slowly. He looked at the manifest for a long moment, and Eleanor watched something move behind his eyes. Not surprise, exactly. More like the grim satisfaction of a man who has been patient for a very long time, and is now watching a calculation come out exactly as he feared it would. "Gerald Caldwell," he said quietly, "sits on the State Merchant Council. He has direct access to land registry records for the entire county system." "Which is how they've been filing the fraudulent deeds without triggering review," Eleanor said. "He's not just participating in the fraud. He's been protecting it from inside the registry process." "If that's provable." "It's provable," she said. "I know Gerald Caldwell's accounting methods better than he does. Give me the rest of the Hargrove import records and the Caldwell correspondence you pulled from the county office. I'll have a complete trail within the week." Nathaniel looked at her across his desk. "Eleanor." His voice had a quality she hadn't heard from him before. Careful, deliberate. The tone of a man about to say something he has thought through from multiple angles. "If we can prove Gerald Caldwell's direct involvement, the implications for Edward extend considerably beyond his engagement contract." She understood what he was saying. Edward, who had signed her away. Edward, whose family had used her work to cover their crimes. Edward, who had looked at her across a ballroom with that sick, complicated expression, and said this was family obligation, and meant it, had actually believed it, had never once understood that he was describing his own corruption as someone else's burden. "I know," she said. "Do you want me to stop?" The question hung between them. "No," Nathaniel said. "I want you to finish it." She went back to work. The invitation arrived Thursday, Governor Whitmore's autumn civic dinner, Philadelphia's most significant political gathering of the season. The event where merchant families and government officials shared a table and pretended this was normal, rather than exactly as dangerous as it actually was. Agnes brought it to Eleanor in the study, with the expression of someone handing over a loaded weapon. "Both our names," Eleanor said, reading it. "The governor specifically requested your presence by name." Agnes's voice was carefully neutral. "Which means the governor knows rather more about you than you've been publicly told." Eleanor set the invitation on the stack of Hargrove records. "Nathaniel knew this was coming." "The colonel," Agnes said, in the tone she used when she was choosing her words with surgical precision, "generally knows things are coming several steps before they arrive. It's one of his less endearing qualities." Eleanor found him in the kitchen, his kitchen, the small one, which she had learned was where he went when he was thinking about something he hadn't decided yet. He was standing at the stove with his back to her, and he didn't turn around when she came in. "You knew about the dinner," she said. "I was informed about the dinner," he said. "There's a distinction." "Nathaniel." He turned around. His expression was exactly as controlled as always, which by now Eleanor had learned to read as its own kind of tell. The tighter the control, the more significant the thing underneath it. "The governor wants to move," he said. "He's been patient with my timeline, but the Hargrove-Caldwell connection changes the calculus. If Gerald Caldwell suspects we're close, he'll destroy the evidence," Eleanor said. "The original land deeds, the real correspondence." "He'll try." Nathaniel crossed his arms. "The dinner is Whitmore's way of telling me the window is closing. He needs this to happen publicly, in a setting where the families can't quietly manage the fallout. A civic dinner with half the city present is the setting where careers end and can't be resurrected afterward." Eleanor absorbed this. "How much of what I've found is ready to present?" "How much do you have?" "The shipping manifest with a ledger code. 3 forged land deeds I can prove are forgeries through the registry inconsistencies. 2 letters, copies but authenticated, between Gerald Caldwell and Heiress and Hargrove, using language that's unambiguously conspiratorial, if you understand the accounting references." She paused. "And 1 original document." Nathaniel went still. "What original?" "The deed to the Mercer farm," she said. "The family that lost their property in the spring of 1813. The deed that transferred their land to a Hargrove subsidiary. The original forged deed, Nathaniel, not a copy." She held his gaze. "Your contact at the Port Authority had it in a file, mislabeled as a routine customs dispute. I found it 4 days ago." The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. "You've had an original document for 4 days," Nathaniel said. "And you didn't tell me." "I was verifying it." Her voice stayed level. "I needed to be certain before I brought it to you. I'm certain now." He looked at her for a long moment, with an expression that was partly the sharp, assessing attention he brought to everything, and partly something else. Something she was still learning to name. "Where is it?" "Locked in the East Room," she said. "In the 2nd drawer, under my copy of Blackstone's commentaries." She paused. "I thought you might want to know your filing system has a flaw. Anyone who knows which books I keep on that shelf would find it immediately." "It's been there 4 days," he said. "I didn't find it." "You weren't looking," she said. "That's the point. Hide things where people assume they already know the contents." Another pause. Then something crossed his face that she was beginning to recognize. That particular involuntary shift that happened when she did something that recalibrated his estimate of a situation. "The dinner is in 8 days," he said. "Can you have the full evidentiary sequence documented by then?" "7," she said. "I'll have it in 7." He nodded once. "Then we go to the dinner." She had it in 6. The completed case file was the most rigorous document Eleanor had ever produced, and she had produced some rigorous documents. Every forged deed cross-referenced against the registry inconsistency that proved it false. Every financial connection traced through 3 layers of deliberately obscured accounting to the Caldwell-Hargrove partnership at the center. The original Mercer deed as the keystone, the piece of physical evidence that could not be explained away or dismissed as conjecture. 15 families had lost their land. Eleanor had documented every single one. She was reading through the final sequence at 11 o'clock at night when she heard the front door. Not Agnes. Agnes's step was light and deliberate. This was heavier, faster. She put the file in the drawer, locked it, and went to the top of the stairs. Edward Caldwell was standing in the entrance hall. He had gotten past the front door, which meant either Agnes had let him in, which seemed wildly unlikely, or he had come through the garden entrance, which meant he had been here before and knew the layout. Neither option was comfortable. He looked up and saw her. His face had the hollow, overtired look of a man who had not been sleeping. "Eleanor, I need to speak with you." "You're in my house, uninvited, at 11 at night," she said from the top of the stairs. She didn't move down. "Whatever you need to say, you can say it to my attorney." "Please." The word came out ragged. Something in his voice had changed from the polished ease she remembered. The scrape of something genuinely frightened underneath it. "Please, just listen to me. 5 minutes." She came down the stairs, stopped 6 steps from the bottom, kept the height advantage. 5 minutes. He pulled his hat from his head, turned it in his hands. "My father knows," he said. "He knows Harwick has been investigating the land dealings. Someone in the Port Authority talked." His jaw worked. "Eleanor, if Harwick moves publicly, if this goes before the Governor's Council, my father will not go quietly. He will take everyone he can with him, every name connected to those transactions." "Including yours," she said. Edward's face tightened. "I didn't know about the land fraud. I swear to you, I didn't." "You knew about the ledger code," Eleanor said flatly. "I showed it to you. Your father used it in his correspondence with Heiress and Hargrove for 2 years." She watched his face. "How long have you known?" The silence was its own answer. "Edward." "A year," he said. "I found out about a year ago." He looked at the floor. By then it was already done. The families had already lost the land. There was nothing I could... "There was everything you could have done," Eleanor said. "You could have gone to the governor. You could have come to me. You knew I could read those documents better than any lawyer in this city." Her voice stayed controlled, and it cost her. "Instead, you made a marriage contract to protect your family's position, and you handed me a settlement and walked away." "I was trying to protect you," he said. "If you'd been associated with this, don't." The word came out sharp enough to cut. "Don't you dare tell me you were protecting me. You were protecting yourself. You have been protecting yourself at every decision point in this entire story. And the only reason you're here right now is because the protection has stopped working." He looked at her. In the low light, with the hollowed face and the hat crushed in his hands, he looked nothing like the man who had stood in the Hargrove ballroom accepting congratulations. He looked like a man who had discovered, too late, the cost of a choice he hadn't fully understood he was making. "What do you want me to do?" he said quietly. "Go home," Eleanor said. "Talk to a lawyer. And if your conscience hasn't entirely atrophied, consider what those 15 families lost." She met his eyes. "Their land is gone, Edward. Their farms, their children's inheritance. Because your father needed to expand his shipping contracts, and Heiress and Hargrove needed land for warehouses." She paused. "There's nothing you can tell me tonight that changes what happens next. That's not cruelty. That's just where we are." He stood there for another moment. Then he put his hat back on. "He won't forgive me," he said. "My father. If I cooperate with Harwick's investigation, he will not forgive it." Eleanor thought of Nathaniel, 19 years old, standing in front of a court and testifying against his own father while his family watched and turned away. She thought of 30 years of silence in this house. She thought of 2 locks on a door and a filing system that had become, over a decade, one man's attempt to hold a corrupt world together through sheer determined patience. "Some choices," she said, "you make because they're right. Not because they're easy. Not because the people who should forgive you will." She looked at him steadily. "That's the only kind of choice that means anything, Edward. I think you know that. I think you've always known it." He left without another word. She stood in the entrance hall for a long moment after the door closed. Then she turned around and found Nathaniel standing at the end of the hallway. He had come in from the back of the house, the study side, and he was watching her with those gray eyes that never entirely stopped working. "How long," she said, "were you standing there?" "Long enough," he said. "He might cooperate." "He might." Nathaniel moved toward her slowly. "He's more frightened than his father. Fear makes people unpredictable." "His father knows you're close," she said. "Gerald Caldwell will move to protect himself. We don't have 7 days anymore." "No," Nathaniel agreed. "We have 3. 4 at the outside." He stopped in front of her. "Eleanor, if this accelerates, if Whitmore has to act before the dinner, it will be louder and messier than I planned. The families will fight back hard. It will fall directly on you as much as on me." "I know. I need you to be certain." She looked at him, at the controlled face and the gray eyes, and the rigid set of a man who had been carrying this alone for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to have someone standing beside him at the moment that mattered. "I finished the case file 6 days ahead of schedule," she said. "I found the original deed your contact missed for 14 months. I sat across from Victoria Hargrove and gave her nothing. And I just told Edward Caldwell the truth to his face, when a better tactical move might have been to manage him more carefully." She held his gaze. "Nathaniel, I am certain. I have been certain since I signed that contract in the garden." Something in his expression shifted. Not the usual recalibration, not the analytical adjustment. Something underneath all of it. Something older and quieter and considerably more vulnerable. "All right," he said. He said it the way a man says something he has wanted to say for longer than he's been admitting to himself. "Then we move in 3 days." He turned to go back to the study. "Nathaniel," he stopped. "Edward said his father knows about the investigation," she said. "Someone in the Port Authority talked." She paused. "That means Hargrove knows too. And if Hargrove knows we have documents, he will come for the original deed first. It's the one piece of evidence that can't be explained away." Nathaniel turned back around slowly. His expression had gone very still. "Where did you say it was?" he said. "East room," she said. "Second drawer, under the—" She was already moving before she finished the sentence. He was 2 steps behind her. They went up the stairs fast and quiet, down the corridor, and Eleanor pushed open the east room door and crossed to the bookshelf in 4 strides and pulled out her copy of Blackstone's Commentaries and opened the second drawer below it, and the drawer was there. The drawer was intact. The deed was exactly where she had put it, folded in its oilcloth sleeve, undisturbed. She exhaled. "It's here," she said. "Good." Nathaniel's voice came from directly behind her, close enough that she could hear the controlled quality of his own breath, the steadiness of a man who had been more alarmed than he was showing. "It stays on you from here forward, not in a drawer, not in a room, on your person." She turned around. He was very close, closer than he usually stood, the proximity born of urgency rather than intention. He looked at her for one moment that lasted longer than it should have, in the way that certain moments do when something important is happening that neither person has found the words for yet. Then he stepped back, put distance and control back in place, as neat as buttoning a coat. "Sleep," he said. "Tomorrow we go through everything one last time. 3 days, Eleanor." He left. Eleanor stood holding the deed in its oilcloth sleeve and listened to his footsteps go down the corridor, steady and measured and entirely, deliberately controlled. She pressed the document flat against her chest and felt her heart beating fast against it. 3 days. Whatever came after that, nothing in Philadelphia would be the same. The next morning came in hard and fast. Eleanor was already dressed when Agnes knocked at 6, the deed in its oilcloth sleeve tucked inside the inner seam of her traveling jacket. A modification she had made herself the night before with needle and thread from Agnes's sewing basket, stitching a flat pocket against the lining where no casual search would find it. She had slept 3 hours. She did not feel it. Nathaniel was at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and the letter he had clearly read more than once. He looked up when she walked in, and something in his face shifted. The particular adjustment of a man who had been sitting alone with bad news and was now deciding how much of it to share. "What happened?" Eleanor said. Not a question. He handed her the letter. It was from Governor Whitmore's private secretary. Formal, measured, the kind of language designed to say something serious while leaving no fingerprints. The substance was this: Gerald Caldwell had filed a formal petition with the State Merchant Council the previous afternoon, citing Colonel Harwick's investigation as an illegal seizure of private commercial records obtained without proper authorization. The petition named 2 specific documents: the shipping manifests from the Port Authority. Someone at the Port Authority had told Gerald Caldwell not just that the investigation existed, but what had been taken. "He's trying to shut it down before we move," Eleanor said. "He's trying to discredit the evidence," Nathaniel said. "If the council rules the documents were obtained improperly, everything derived from them becomes inadmissible. The forged deeds, the financial connections, all of it." He picked up his coffee cup, looked at it, set it back down. "The council meets Friday." "That's 2 days," Eleanor said, "before the governor's dinner." "If the council rules against us Friday, Whitmore can't act at the dinner. He'll have no legal standing." Nathaniel's jaw was tight. Gerald Caldwell is a smart man. He identified exactly the right pressure point. Eleanor looked at the letter again, read the specific language around the authorization claim, read it a second time. Something tugged at the edge of her attention, a thread of memory from the Caldwell household papers she had spent 3 years managing. "The Port Authority records," she said slowly. "What authorization did you use to access them?" "Standing Federal Investigative Commission," Nathaniel said. "Signed by Whitmore in 1811. And Gerald Caldwell's argument is that the commission's scope doesn't cover private commercial records." "Correct." "He's wrong," Eleanor said. Nathaniel looked at her. The commission language is broad because I helped draft the enabling documentation," she said. When Whitmore established the investigative framework, his office contracted Gerald Caldwell's legal team to review the charter. I wrote the Caldwell response memo, the one recommending acceptance of the broad scope language. She met his eyes steadily. Gerald Caldwell signed a formal recommendation endorsing the exact authorization he's now claiming is invalid. I wrote it. I know every word. The silence lasted 2 full seconds. "You have a copy," Nathaniel said. "Gerald Caldwell's office keeps copies of every formal recommendation they issue. It's in their records archive." She paused. "It's also in my personal files. I kept copies of everything I produced for that household. Force of habit." Nathaniel stood up from the table so fast the chair scraped the floor. "Get it." "I already have it," she said. "I went through my files last night." She reached into her jacket pocket, the outer one, not the hidden seam, and produced a folded document. Set it on the table. "Gerald Caldwell spent 3 years using my work without crediting it. He is now going to have the extraordinary experience of being undone by it." Nathaniel looked at the document. Then he looked at her. Then he said, in a voice entirely stripped of its usual controlled distance, "Eleanor." "Don't," she held up a hand. "Don't be impressed yet. We still have to get this in front of the council before Friday." He picked up the letter from Whitmore's secretary, looked at it with an expression that was rapid and decisive. I know 2 council members who are not in Caldwell's pocket. If I move this morning, she said, I'll stay here and finish the case summary. If the council meeting is Friday, Whitmore needs the complete documentation today so he can review it and prepare his position before the session. The summary isn't finished. It will be by noon. He looked at her for one more moment. The weighing look, the assessment. And then he picked up his hat from the hook by the door and said, I'll be back by mid-afternoon, and left. The house settled into its particular silence around her. Eleanor poured the cold coffee down the basin, made fresh, and went to work. She had 40 pages completed and the summary 3/4 done when Agnes appeared in the study doorway at 10:30, with an expression that Eleanor had learned to read precisely. Someone is at the door, Agnes said. He didn't send a card. Eleanor set down her pen. Who is it? Edward Caldwell, Agnes said. The younger. Eleanor closed the document folder. Bring him in. Edward looked worse than he had 2 nights ago. He had not slept either, but unlike Eleanor, the sleeplessness had done visible damage. The hollowed look had deepened, and he moved with the careful, braced quality of a man who has made a decision and is afraid of what it cost him. He sat down across from her without being invited to, and placed a leather satchel on the table between them. I spoke with my father last night, he said. After I left here. Eleanor waited. He told me to stay out of it. Edward's hands pressed flat on the table. He told me the council petition would handle everything, that Harwick's investigation would be ruled invalid, and there would be no evidence and no case. He swallowed. He was very certain. He's wrong to be, Eleanor said. I know. Edward pushed the satchel across the table. I know because I know what's in his records. And I know you can read them faster and more accurately than his lawyers can hide them. He met her eyes for the first time since he'd walked in. That satchel contains every document I had personal access to in my father's correspondence files. I don't know if all of it is relevant. Some of it I don't fully understand. He paused. But you will. Eleanor put her hand on the satchel. Didn't open it yet. Looked at Edward Caldwell across the table. The man she had loved and built a future around, and watched sign her name away in red ink. And tried to locate what she felt about this moment. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Something quieter and sadder and more honest than either of those. If you do this, she said, your father will know it was you. Yes. He'll cut you off, publicly. Everything, the business, the house, the connections. Yes. Edward's jaw worked. Victoria has already... We've spoken. She understands the situation may change. His expression said clearly enough what change meant. Another contract, renegotiated. The Hargrove interest in the Caldwell alliance was contingent on the Caldwell name being worth something. I have very little left to protect, he said. So, Eleanor opened the satchel, looked at the first 3 documents. Her eyes moved fast. She was reading for structure, for pattern, for the shape of information rather than every word. By the 5th document, she said, This is Gerald Caldwell's direct communication with the County Land Registry Office. She looked up. Signed, requesting the specific processing of the Mercer deed transfer, dated 2 weeks before the deed was filed. She pulled it carefully from the stack. This isn't incriminating. This is a confession. Edward put his face in his hands. Edward. Her voice came out steady and almost gentle. You did the right thing. Whatever comes next, you did the right thing today. He nodded without looking up. Is that supposed to feel better than it does? Not yet, she said honestly. But eventually. Nathaniel came back at 2:30 with the expression of a man who had moved fast and hard all morning and was running on forward momentum and controlled fury. He stopped in the study doorway when he saw the open satchel on the table. What is that? Edward Caldwell's conscience, Eleanor said, arriving approximately 3 years late, but with excellent documentation. She held up the registry letter. Gerald Caldwell signed a direct request for the Mercer deed transfer, dated and witnessed. Combined with the original deed, this eliminates every possible defense his lawyers can construct. She let Nathaniel take the letter, watched him read it. The council petition is moot. This document connects the fraud directly to Gerald Caldwell by his own hand. The authorization question becomes irrelevant when you have a signed confession sitting inside the very evidence you're trying to suppress. Nathaniel read the letter twice, set it down very carefully on the table.
Where's Edward now?
I sent him home, Eleanor said. He'll need to make a formal statement. I told him to have a lawyer present when he does, someone not connected to his father. Good. Nathaniel picked up the completed case summary from the far end of the table, checked the page count, looked at the clock. I need to get this to Whitmore before 4. If he has this tonight, he can change the dinner from a social occasion to a formal proceeding, Eleanor said. With proper legal standing, yes. Nathaniel was already moving toward the door. The council petition will be withdrawn before Friday. Gerald Caldwell's lawyers will advise him to pull it the moment they see this letter, because a public council hearing is the last thing he wants now. That leaves the dinner as the first and best opportunity to move. He stopped, turned back. Eleanor, I need you at that dinner. Not as an observer, as a presenting witness. The words landed differently than she expected. Presenting witness. Not advising from the edge of the room. Not drafting documents for someone else to sign. Standing up in front of Philadelphia's most powerful gathering and speaking, on the record, in her own name. In front of Whitmore, she said, and the Merchant Council, and every family connected to the investigation. Including the Caldwells, Nathaniel said. Including the Hargroves. Including everyone who has ever looked through you. His gray eyes held hers. You can say no. I can present the evidence myself. But Eleanor, your analysis is what made this case. Your voice is the one that should deliver it. She thought of line 47 on a shipping manifest. She thought of the ledger code she had invented and that had been stolen. She thought of 15 families and their children's inheritance and the farms they would never get back. I'll be ready, she said. He nodded once and left. Agnes appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later, as if she had been waiting precisely this long out of courtesy. I'll press the blue wool, she said, for the dinner. It's the most authoritative thing you own, she paused. And I'll make something substantial for supper. You've both been running on coffee and stubbornness since Tuesday, and that's not a sustainable diet for what's coming. Eleanor looked at her. Agnes, how many of his investigations have you seen through? Agnes considered this with the air of someone who doesn't sentimentalize. 4 major ones, 11 smaller. She straightened slightly. He's never had a partner for any of them. She met Eleanor's eyes directly. He's also never looked quite the way he looks when he comes back to this house. In the past 3 weeks. Eleanor opened her mouth to say something pragmatic and deflecting. Agnes held up one hand, already turning to leave. Supper at 7, she said. Don't overthink it. The night before the dinner, Gerald Caldwell came himself. Eleanor heard the carriage outside at 9:30 and knew, from the weight of the footsteps, from the way Agnes's voice at the door dropped to its most formal register, that this was not Edward. She came to the top of the stairs. Nathaniel was already in the entrance hall, standing with the still, settled quality of a man who has been expecting this and is not surprised, but is not pleased. Gerald Caldwell had aged since she had last stood in the same room with him. Or perhaps she was simply seeing him without the filter of employment, without the need to manage his impression of her. He looked like what he was, a man of 60 who had made a great deal of money through sharp dealing and was accustomed to that being sufficient. He looked up at Eleanor on the stairs, and his expression moved through several calculations very quickly. "Miss Marsh," he said. "Mrs. Harwick," she said. She came down the stairs slowly. "Good evening, Mr. Caldwell." He looked at Nathaniel. "Call off your petition to Whitmore. Whatever you think you have." "The petition is already with the governor," Nathaniel said. "It was delivered 4 hours ago." Gerald's jaw set. "Then withdraw it. I'm prepared to offer—" "You're not in a position to offer anything," Nathaniel said, and his voice had that quality Eleanor had heard only twice, the flat, absolute certainty of a man who has all the ground and knows it. "The evidence against you is complete. Your son's cooperation ensured that." He paused. "You raised a boy who understood, at the last moment, that some lines matter. That's more than I expected from your household." Gerald Caldwell's face went through something complicated at the mention of Edward. Anger, and underneath it, Eleanor saw it clearly, because she had spent 3 years reading this man's reactions across negotiating tables. Something that might have been pain. The pain of a father who had taught his son to prioritize money, and was now discovering his son had learned a different lesson from somewhere. "You'll destroy this family," Gerald said. "You destroyed it," Nathaniel said. 15 families lost their land, their homes, their children's future. You destroyed those families for warehouse space and shipping contracts. His voice stayed level. "The reckoning for that isn't something I chose, Mr. Caldwell. It's something you built, one forged deed at a time." Gerald looked at Eleanor. Something in his expression shifted. The old instinct, she recognized it, to try a different angle. "You worked for us 3 years, he said. "We treated you well, paid you fairly." "You paid me for secretarial work," Eleanor said, "and used my strategic analysis to commit fraud. And then you sold your son's engagement to silence the investigation." She kept her voice even. "I don't have feelings about this, Mr. Caldwell. I have documentation." His mouth pressed into a thin line. He looked between them, measuring, calculating, and finding, for perhaps the first time in his professional life, that the calculation came out against him. "The dinner tomorrow," he said. "If you do this publicly—" "The dinner is a formal proceeding now," Nathaniel said. "Governor Whitmore signed the authorization 2 hours ago. Whatever happens tomorrow happens on the record, publicly, permanently." He moved to the door and opened it with the deliberate, final courtesy of a man closing a conversation. "Good night, Mr. Caldwell." Gerald Caldwell left. The door closed. The entrance hall was very quiet. Eleanor realized her hands were completely steady and her heart was hammering. She pressed one hand against the wall and breathed through it. "He'll run," she said. "Tonight or early morning. He'll try to leave the city." "I know," Nathaniel said. "Whitmore has people watching the road exits." He looked at her. "It was the first thing I arranged when I left this afternoon." She exhaled. "You planned for that." "I plan for everything." He crossed the entrance hall and stopped in front of her, closer than he usually stood, and Eleanor thought about what Agnes had said. "He's never looked quite the way he looks," and kept her expression carefully composed. "Eleanor," his voice dropped half a register, "tomorrow is going to be difficult. Whatever you've prepared for, it will be harder than that. These people do not accept accountability gracefully. They will say things about you in that room, specifically designed to make you doubt yourself." "I know." "And you will not doubt yourself," he said. Not a question, a statement of what he had decided was true. "No," she said. "I won't." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and, with one careful, deliberate motion, adjusted the collar of her jacket where it had turned slightly. A small, precise, entirely unnecessary gesture that lasted approximately 2 seconds and somehow used all the air in the entrance hall. "Get some sleep," he said. He stepped back, reassembled the distance. "Tomorrow, we end this." She watched him go down the corridor to his side of the house. Then she stood in the entrance hall alone and pressed her hand flat against her sternum, where her heart was doing something entirely unrelated to fraud investigations and land deeds. She was in considerable trouble, she thought, of a kind that had nothing to do with the Caldwells. She went upstairs. She did not sleep for a very long time. But when she finally did, it was the deep, dreamless sleep of someone who has decided, completely, finally, without reservation, that tomorrow they will stand up and say what is true, regardless of the cost. The deed was still sewn into her jacket lining. The jacket hung in the chair by her bed. In the morning, she would put it on and walk into the most significant room Philadelphia had to offer, and she would speak in her own name for the first time in 3 years. She was ready. Gerald Caldwell did not run. Eleanor learned this from Agnes at 6 in the morning, who had learned it from Nathaniel's contact at the North Road, who had spent the night watching the Caldwell carriage house and seen nothing move. She stood in the kitchen holding a cup of coffee and processed this information carefully. A man who ran was a man who had accepted defeat. A man who stayed was a man who still believed he could win. That was considerably more dangerous. Nathaniel came in from the back entrance at 6:30, his coat damp from the early morning heat, his expression carrying the particular tightness of someone who had been thinking hard since before dawn. He saw her face and said, "You know."
"He stayed," Eleanor said. "He stayed."
Nathaniel poured coffee. "Which means he's spoken to his lawyers overnight and they've given him a strategy." He leaned against the counter. "He'll try to discredit the evidence at the dinner itself, in the room, in public, before Whitmore can formally enter it into the record. If he can create enough confusion and doubt in the first 10 minutes, the political will to act dissolves." "How?" "By attacking the source." Nathaniel looked at her steadily. "By arguing that every document you analyzed was either misread or deliberately misrepresented. That the conclusions were drawn by a woman with a personal grievance against the Caldwell family. That the investigation was designed not to serve justice, but to serve your revenge." He paused. "He will say it plainly, Eleanor, in front of everyone." She set down her coffee cup. The china made a small, precise sound against the table. "And is that your concern? That they'll believe him?" "My concern," Nathaniel said, "is that they'll want to believe him. It's easier. It lets them keep their world intact." He held her gaze. "I need you to be prepared for the ugliness of it." "I've been prepared for this since the night I signed that contract," she said. "Let him say it. Let him say every word of it in front of Whitmore and the full Merchant Council and every family in Philadelphia who's been telling themselves for years that women like me don't belong in the rooms where decisions get made." She picked her coffee back up. "The evidence doesn't change because he questions my motives. The forged deeds are still forged. The registry letter is still signed in his own hand. The ledger code is still mine." She looked at Nathaniel directly. "He can attack me all he wants. He cannot change what is true." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said simply, "No, he cannot." They finished breakfast without talking. The silence between them had changed somewhere over the past 3 weeks. It had stopped being the careful silence of two strangers managing distance and become the comfortable silence of two people who had learned to think alongside each other, without needing to fill every space with words. Eleanor noticed this the way you notice a change in the weather, gradually, and then all at once. Agnes appeared at 8 to tell them the carriage was ready. She looked at Eleanor for one measured moment, and then, with the economy of a woman who expressed herself precisely because she expressed herself rarely, she straightened Eleanor's collar and said, "Head up, every second." Then she stepped back and said nothing else. It was enough. The governor's civic dinner was held in the State House Assembly Room, which was the largest formal gathering space in Philadelphia, and which Eleanor had been inside exactly once before, 4 years ago, when she had delivered a briefing document on behalf of Gerald Caldwell, and stood at the back of the room while he presented her work and accepted the committee's approval. Today she walked in through the front entrance on Nathaniel's arm, and she walked in first. The room was full. Every significant merchant family in the city, council members, state officials, and there, across the room, Gerald Caldwell, standing with 3 lawyers and the rigid composure of a man running on controlled desperation. Harrison Hargrove beside him, his face arranged into the careful neutrality of someone who has not yet decided which way to step. Victoria Hargrove, 2 places away, watching Eleanor's entrance with an expression that had moved, in the weeks since their parlor meeting, from contempt to something Eleanor recognized as involuntary respect, and resented herself for feeling. And Edward, standing slightly apart from his father, his hands at his sides, his face pale and resolved. He met Eleanor's eyes across the room and nodded once. She nodded back. Governor Whitmore called the assembly to order at precisely 10 o'clock. He was a compact, energetic man of 55, who gave the impression of someone who had made peace with the political cost of doing the right thing, and was grateful to be done negotiating with himself about it. He had the document folder from yesterday's delivery in front of him, and he opened it without preamble. "This assembly has been formally convened," he said, "to address evidence of systematic land fraud affecting 15 property-holding families in the greater Philadelphia County, and the involvement of members of our merchant community in those fraudulent proceedings. Colonel Harwick." He looked up. "Please present." Nathaniel stepped forward. He spoke for 12 minutes, clean and precise, and entirely without theater. Dates, documents, financial connections, the mechanism of the fraud laid out in sequence, the way a soldier lays out tactical information, each piece in its logical position. He was authoritative and unemotional, and devastating. When he finished, Gerald Caldwell's senior lawyer stepped forward immediately. "Governor Whitmore, the documents Colonel Harwick references were obtained through an investigative commission of questionable scope." "The commission's scope," Eleanor said from where she stood, "was formally endorsed by the Caldwell family's own legal team in their recommendation memo of September 1811. I have the signed original." She produced it from the folder she carried and held it up. "Mr. Caldwell himself authorized the broad investigative language he is now claiming is invalid." The lawyer stopped, looked at Gerald. Gerald's jaw tightened. "Furthermore," Eleanor continued, "I will be presenting the analytical summary of the evidentiary record which documents the mechanism and participants of the fraud in full." She looked at Whitmore. "With your permission, Governor." "Granted," Whitmore said. "Mrs. Harwick, please proceed." She stepped forward. Gerald Caldwell moved at exactly that moment, not physically, but his voice, louder than it needed to be, cutting across the room with the practiced authority of a man who had controlled rooms for 30 years. "Governor Whitmore, I must object to this presentation. Mrs. Harwick is not a neutral party. She was formerly employed in a subordinate capacity by my household, and has a well-documented personal grievance against my son and my family. Her analysis cannot be considered objective." "The analysis is documented," Eleanor said, and her voice was steady and clear, and carried to every corner of the room. "Every conclusion is traceable to a specific document. The documents speak for themselves, Mr. Caldwell. My feelings about your family are not relevant to what is written in your own correspondence." "You're a secretary," Gerald said. The word landed sharp and deliberate. "You filed papers. You wrote letters. You are not a lawyer, not a qualified examiner, not a recognized—" "She's the person who identified the registry inconsistency in your forged deeds," Nathaniel said from behind her, his voice flat and absolute. "In 14 months, 3 qualified examiners missed it. She found it in 4 minutes." He looked at Gerald with those gray eyes that had faced down worse men than this. "Her qualifications are demonstrated, not declared, which is more than can be said for the men who certified your fraudulent documents." A murmur moved through the room. Eleanor felt it, the shift in a crowd when the dominant narrative starts to crack. She opened her folder, began. She spoke for 18 minutes. She presented the forged deeds and their specific inconsistencies, using language that was technical when it needed to be, and plain when plain was more devastating. She presented the financial connections between the Hargrove shipping accounts and the Caldwell registry access. She presented the ledger code, her code, designed by her hand, and its appearance in Hargrove documents that predated any legitimate connection between the families. And then she reached into her jacket, into the hidden seam pocket, and produced the Mercer deed. "This," she said, "is the original fraudulent deed transferring the Mercer family's farm, 83 acres, their home, their barn, 3 generations of cultivated land, to a Hargrove subsidiary. This is not a copy. This is the original document." She held it so the room could see the seal. "And this," she produced the registry letter, "is Gerald Caldwell's signed request for the processing of this deed, dated 14 days before it was filed, in his own handwriting, witnessed by his own clerk." The room was completely silent. Gerald Caldwell's face had gone gray. "That letter," his lawyer said, recovering fast, "is not authenticated." "I'll authenticate it." The voice came from the left side of the room. Edward Caldwell stepped forward. His voice shook slightly, but it didn't stop. "I recognize my father's handwriting. I recognize his seal. And I have 17 additional documents from his private correspondence that corroborate every conclusion in Mrs. Harwick's summary." He reached into his coat and produced his own folder and set it on the table in front of Whitmore with the careful deliberateness of a man placing down something very heavy that he has been carrying too long. "I am prepared to make a full statement." The silence lasted 4 seconds. They were the loudest 4 seconds Eleanor had ever experienced. Gerald Caldwell looked at his son. Something crossed his face that was too complicated and too private for a public room. The look of a man seeing a consequence he had built himself and cannot dismantle. "Edward," he said. His voice had lost its authority. It came out quiet and almost confused. The voice of a man who genuinely had not understood until this moment that his son would choose this. "I'm sorry, Father," Edward said. He didn't look away. "I should have done this a year ago." Governor Whitmore looked at the documents in front of him. Then he looked at Gerald Caldwell with the expression of a man who has made peace with what comes next. "Gerald Caldwell," he said formally, "Harrison Hargrove. You are hereby detained pending a full formal inquiry into the land fraud proceedings affecting 15 families in Philadelphia County. Your accounts and records are frozen, effective immediately." He nodded to the 2 federal officers standing at the room's side entrance, who had, Eleanor now understood, been there all morning. "Officers, Harrison Hargrove went pale, but didn't resist. Gerald Caldwell stood very still for a moment, and then his shoulders dropped. Not in defeat, exactly, but in the particular exhaustion of a man who has been holding a structure together through force of will and has finally let it go. As the officers moved forward, Gerald looked across the room. Not at Whitmore, not at Nathaniel, at Eleanor. She met his gaze and held it. She did not look triumphant. She did not look angry. She looked at him the way she had learned to look at difficult things, directly, steadily, without flinching and without cruelty. He looked away first. The room broke into controlled chaos the moment the officers escorted Caldwell and Hargrove out. Voices overlapping, council members clustering in urgent conversation, several prominent wives of prominent men making immediate calculations about which way the new landscape ran. Eleanor stood at the front of the room with her folder in her hands and felt the strangest thing. Not relief, not triumph, not even satisfaction exactly. Something quieter. The feeling of a weight she had been carrying so long she'd stopped noticing it, setting itself down. Victoria Hargrove crossed the room toward her. Eleanor watched her come and kept her expression neutral. Victoria stopped 2 feet away. She looked at Eleanor with the same complicated, involuntary expression from the parlor. And this time, there was no pretense around it. Nothing social covering it. Just the bare, unmediated fact of it. "You really did all of this," Victoria said. Not accusatory, almost wondering. "The documents, the analysis, all of it." "Yes," Eleanor said. "I called you a secretary." Victoria's voice was flat, with something that wasn't quite an apology, but was moving in that direction with visible effort. "I said cleverness wasn't breeding." "You did." Victoria stopped, started again. "My father used me the same way Edward used you, to manage the social presentation, while the real decisions happened somewhere I wasn't allowed." Her jaw tightened. "I didn't see it until just now. Watching you stand up there." She paused. "I don't know what I'm trying to say." "I think," Eleanor said carefully, "that you're trying to say that you understand something now that you didn't before." She met the other woman's eyes. "That's enough. That's where it starts." Victoria held her gaze for a moment longer. Then she nodded, small, precise, the nod of a woman who does not give acknowledgement easily, and means it when she does, and walked away. Nathaniel appeared at Eleanor's side. He had the particular quality of a man who has been watching everything and is now allowing himself to exhale. "Whitmore wants to speak with us," he said, formally. "There's a position he wants to discuss." "What kind of position?" "The kind that means this work doesn't stop with the Caldwells and Hargroves." His voice was quiet enough for only her. "There are 11 other merchant families on those maps. The fraud we uncovered is one thread in a larger pattern. Whitmore has understood for years that he needs someone to address it systematically. Someone with investigative authority. Someone with a legal and analytical background to build cases that hold." He paused. "Someone with your particular set of skills." Eleanor looked at him. "He's asking me." "He's asking us," Nathaniel said. "Both. Together. Formally commissioned." He turned to face her fully. This would not be a temporary arrangement. This would be a life's work. Years of it. Complicated, difficult, morally imperfect work. The kind where you make hard choices, and sometimes the right answer isn't clean, and you go to sleep knowing you did the best you could and hoping it was enough. She studied him. "You're describing your life." "I'm describing what it could become," he said, "for both of us." He looked at her with a direct, undeflected honesty that she had come to understand was the most intimate thing about him. The way he looked at her when he had stopped calculating and was simply saying the true thing. I have not been good at this, at any of this, the personal part of it. I have been alone for so long that I am considerably out of practice at Nathaniel, she kept her voice gentle. I'm not asking you to be practiced at it. He exhaled. The contract expires in 7 months. I know. I would like... He stopped, started again. Eleanor, I would like to renegotiate the terms, if you're willing. She looked at him, this stubborn, solitary, rigidly principled man who had spent 30 years protecting a kingdom that didn't know his name, who cooked eggs in a small kitchen when he needed to think, who had put 2 locks on a door and left it open anyway because some part of him had been waiting for a very long time for someone who could see what he saw. The original contract, she said, was an alliance. Yes. I'd like something different, she said. If you're offering something different. The controlled expression shifted. Underneath it, real, unmanaged, entirely unguarded, was the face of a man who had just heard the thing he had not let himself hope for. I am, he said, offering something different. Yes. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, firm and calloused and steady. The way they had been steady every single time it mattered. Then let's go hear what the governor has to say, she said. They crossed the room together, and the crowd parted the way it had been parting before them for weeks now. Not out of fear exactly, and not out of mere social courtesy, but out of the particular deference people extend to those who have demonstrated past any reasonable doubt that they are exactly where they belong. Governor Whitmore met them at the far end of the room. He was smiling, with the satisfaction of a man who has watched something he invested in pay a return beyond his original estimate. Colonel Harwick, he said. Then he looked at Eleanor. Mrs. Harwick, I owe you a formal acknowledgement. That analysis was the most rigorous investigative presentation this assembly has received in 20 years. The evidence supported it, Eleanor said. The evidence required someone who could read it, Whitmore replied. That someone was you. I intend to ensure that is on the official record of these proceedings. Your name, your work. No ambiguity. He paused. And I intend to offer you a formal commission. Both of you. The Office of State Investigative Counsel, with full authority over merchant and land affairs, answerable directly to the governor's office. He looked between them. Pennsylvania has 17 counties and a corruption problem in most of them. I need people I trust to address it. We accept, Eleanor said. She felt Nathaniel's hand tighten slightly around hers. On the condition that the 15 families who lost land in the Caldwell-Hargrove fraud are the first matter addressed by the new office. Restitution, full and formal. Their names cleared from every false record. Whitmore nodded. Done. And the documentation of the cases, the analysis, the investigative record, is signed by the investigator of record, not by a supervising authority. If I do the work, my name is on it. Also done, Whitmore said, with the expression of a man making note that this woman negotiates with the same precision she analyzes documents. She looked at Nathaniel. He was watching her with the expression she had stopped being able to name because it didn't fit cleanly into any category she'd had before she met him. It was assessment and pride, and that quiet, unguarded thing underneath both of them that he was only now learning to stop suppressing. One more condition, she said, turning back to Whitmore. Name it. The commission is joint, she said, equal authority, equal record. Not Colonel Harwick and his assistant. Not the colonel and his wife. Joint commissioners, named together. She held Whitmore's gaze. If that's not acceptable, we're not the right people for this position. Governor Whitmore looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I believe that is the most sensible thing anyone has said in this room all year, and extended his hand. She shook it. They rode home in the late afternoon, the summer heat finally beginning to break toward evening. Eleanor leaned back against the carriage seat and let herself be tired for the first time in 3 weeks. The real, bone-deep tiredness of someone who has been running hard and has finally crossed the finish line and can stop. 15 families, she said quietly. We'll start the restitution process Monday, Nathaniel said. He was watching her with that look again, the one she'd decided she was done pretending she didn't recognize. Eleanor. That last condition, he said. The joint commission. Equal record. Was that not what you wanted? It was precisely what I wanted, he said. I didn't know how to ask for it. He paused. I have spent 30 years being the person who made things work and allowed other people to receive the credit. I built that into my methods. I told myself it was strategic. He stopped. You stood in front of that room today and demanded your name on your own work, in front of everyone, without apology. His voice was quiet. I have never done that. You testified against your father in open court at 19, she said. You dressed down a governor to his face. You kept a kingdom's secrets for 30 years without recognition and didn't once ask to be thanked. She looked at him steadily. Nathaniel, you have been brave your entire life. You just haven't been brave about this particular thing. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, slow and deliberate and entirely decided, he lifted her hand from where it rested on the seat between them and held it. Simply held it. His thumb moved once across her knuckles. That was all. It was everything. The carriage rolled on through the Philadelphia evening, carrying them toward a house that had begun, quietly and without announcement, to become a home. Behind them, the city they had just changed was already starting to process what had happened. The whisper networks running, the social calculations being revised, the first slow recognition spreading through drawing rooms and merchant offices that the rules of this particular world had shifted and would not shift back. Gerald Caldwell would face formal inquiry and reckoning. Harrison Hargrove's empire would be restructured under state oversight. 15 families would get their land back. And Eleanor Marsh's name would appear for the first time on the official record of every piece of work she had done. Not as a footnote, not in a secondary position, but first. Edward Caldwell sent a note 2 days later. It was short. It said, I understand now what I had and what I chose. I have no right to ask forgiveness, only to say that I hope the work you're doing is everything you deserve to be doing all along. I believe it is. Eleanor read it once and set it aside. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, with the quiet finality of a woman who had processed what needed processing and was ready to be done with it. That evening, Nathaniel cooked in the small kitchen, and Eleanor sat at the table, and they talked about the 17 counties and the investigation timeline and the staff they'd need for the new commission. And somewhere in the middle of it, without deciding to, they stopped talking about work and started talking about everything else. His 19-year-old self standing in a courtroom, her 12-year-old self reading law books by borrowed candlelight, the things that had shaped them into exactly the people who could find each other in a garden on a summer night and build something real. Agnes passed the kitchen doorway once, looked in, and kept walking, with the expression of someone whose expectations have been precisely met. Later, when the house was quiet and the summer night pressed warm against the windows, Eleanor sat at her writing desk. Her desk, in her room, in a house that was hers, and wrote the first line of the first official document of the State Investigative Commission of Pennsylvania. She signed her name at the bottom, Eleanor Harwick, Joint Commissioner. She looked at it for a moment. Then she added in smaller letters below, formerly Eleanor Marsh, daughter of a schoolteacher who read law books by candlelight and built something worth signing her name to. She blew the ink dry, folded the document, set it in the center of the desk where she would find it in the morning. Edward Caldwell had traded her for $50,000 and a better name. She had built something no amount of money could buy and no family name could grant. A record that was entirely, permanently, irrevocably her own. And that, Eleanor Harwick decided, was exactly enough.